Release That Witch. Audiobook, Part 59.
Chapter 813, Monster. Suddenly, Nightingale's view was no longer obscured. Seeing the shocking event unfold, the demonic beasts slowed down, and instead of crazily trying to surround her, they refused to move forward as if they were scared of her. These demonic hybrids were scared. The monster hanging on top of the cave waved its tentacles and roared furiously, but it didn't achieve the desired effect. The only ones who still followed its orders were 3 sickle monsters. They were now powerless and could no longer threaten Nightingale. The tight line of defense had now been broken. No enemy could now stop her. Nightingale gathered what was left of her magic power and rushed towards the dome center. As she was closing in, she finally understood what Fran meant by abnormal. The opponent was not so much a creature as it was a pile of exposed organs. It had neither epidermis nor muscular tissue, while vascular intestines, tentacles, and organs that couldn't even be named were all stacked up, looking both unstable and horrible. Obviously, throwing explosives into the monster's mouth was not possible. Nightingale turned her gaze to a pack of vibrating meatballs. Although she was not certain whether it was a vital organ of the monster or not, it was at least placed much deeper and had flowing magic light inside. She guessed that the explosion of the explosives would inevitably cause more damage there. It was a risky plan, but she only had one chance. This fight required one fatal blow. The more she was closing in, the more she could feel its size. Those complex intestines were as thick as a house, while the rest of the stacked-up organs looked like a castle. The only difference was that this castle was alive. Seeing that the sickle monsters could not stop her, the monster started moving. It shot several slender tentacles from within its body, trying to stop Nightingale. Some of the tentacles were like steel whips, which could easily break the rocks in the mountain, but were not very difficult to deal with. As long as she observed the silhouette of these tentacles in advance, she could use the empty spaces between them to avoid them. It was similar to penetrating a wall. A few tentacles that contained magic power and could use different abilities were a different problem altogether. Those colorful magical beams were particularly striking in the black and white world, and Nightingale definitely did not want to experience what was like to get hit by them, so she used flash to avoid them. This, in turn, would greatly increase the consumption of her magic power. Thankfully, the distance between the monster and her was not huge. Only a few moments had passed before she stepped on the monster's huge body, who roared furiously, but in fear of hurting itself, stopped attacking recklessly with its tentacles. Nightingale instantly felt very relieved. She didn't hesitate to open her backpack, took out a pack of explosives, and rushed straight towards the meatballs. She pulled off her next moves instantaneously. She pulled the fuse, stuffed the green smoked explosive and the backpack into the meatballs, and then returned to the misty world, hanging upside down. Then, she pushed with both of her feet and lunged towards the underground lake like an arrow. The monster also noticed her movements, but it did not seem to understand why the enemy would try so hard to get near just to leave a moment later without doing anything. As for the bag, in the monster's eyes, there was no threat at all. For a moment, it even forgot to move its tentacles to chase after the witch, who was quickly falling. The most dangerous place in the misty world was in midair. She would break into pieces if she hit some airflow silhouettes when she was falling, and so she stopped exerting her ability and waved goodbye to the monster. Curiously, at that moment, she thought of Roland. Whenever they were testing gunpowder, he would always turn his back to the testing ground and say that real warriors never looked at an explosion. Even though both Agatha and her would roll their eyes at him, he didn't mind, as if he had just completed a ritual that only he knew about. Thinking about that, Nightingale couldn't help but smile. But right now, she didn't want to imitate him. It was not about being a real warrior or not. She simply wanted to watch the monster explode into pieces. Just as soon as the sound between the lake and the underground river meeting each other could be heard, a red light suddenly lit up the ceiling of the dark cave. In a place where there was never daylight, a ray of light seemed as bright as the dawn. The darkness quickly faded, leaving behind the long shadows, and for the first time, bright waves appeared on the lake surface. What followed was a thunderous roar. Suddenly, the whole cave shook. Nightingale clearly saw, among the dazzling fireworks, the body of the monster convulsing fiercely, as if it was suffering greatly. Half of the bloody moon covering the dome suddenly disappeared, and some of the organs were shot out like volcanic eruptions. As for the area close to the explosion, it was instantly set on fire, generating a thick, dark smoke. Splash! She crashed into the water. The world momentarily became quiet, leaving only the sound of her beating heart. The fast spinning of the water formed a bottomless black hole under her body, and it seemed like it wanted to drag her into the abyss. In the face of such force, any struggle would be meaningless. But, thankfully, Nightingale was prepared. She released what little of her magic power that was left to summon the mist and used the spiraling white lines to climb to the surface as if climbing the stairs. At this point, the magic power in her body had been completely depleted and the after effects of overuse began to appear. Her brain was attacked by intense pain and dizziness, her limbs could not stop trembling, and she could hardly control her body anymore. As she struggled to get to the lakeshore, Nightingale knew she was running out of strength. Before losing consciousness, she saw a worm breaking through the wall and a golden figure flying towards her in a hurry. Nightingale. Is she okay? Fran asked anxiously. It's nothing serious, she just exhausted her magic power. Agatha briefly examined Nightingale and then handed her to the god's punishment, which, you carry her. We must leave this place at once. When Nightingale left, everyone decided that no matter what, they would go to meet her after the explosion and decided to let Fran eat all their remaining food. Even though it was not certain she could find a way out, she could still crawl with them to the campsite. But they did not expect the explosion to be so effective. It not only stopped the worm carrier inside the walls, but it also made the rest of the demonic beasts flee the area. Leave her to me, Elena personally took Nightingale. After witnessing the battle, the tequila survivors became more respectful toward the blonde witch. Don't we need to finish it off? Lightning looked at the struggling monster, as if not satisfied. It doesn't seem to be dead. Dying beasts are the most dangerous and you can only bring one pack of explosives at most, so it's better not take this risk, Agatha said with a deep voice. By the time the first army has been assembled, it'll be dead sooner or later. Fine, the little girl hesitated before nodding. Just when everyone was ready to leave, the monster suddenly issued a cry. Following the dull and muddy sound, the lake suddenly changed. Under the sparkling flames, a huge skeleton came out of the water and opened a row of rib claws towards the top of the cave. Even in such a fast current of water, it remained steady. The monster loosened its tentacles that were climbing to the top of the cave and fell into the skeleton. The sinking skeleton suddenly stirred up layers of waves, making the lake water push toward the shore. Even the surging underground river flowed backwards for a time. The ribs began to close, as if wrapping up the monster into a package, and then slowly sunk back into the lake. The instant it came into contact with the water, the burning flames on the monster turned into white smoke and emitted a pungent odor. Right before the monster vanished, everyone saw its densely packed eyes. Although half of them were gone, the rest of the eyes expressed a strong sense of hatred toward them. Moments later, the swirling lake engulfed the monster as if it had never appeared. Chapter 8:14, Impartial Person. The demonic beasts have fled. They all fled. Cheers were heard across the battlefield. The demonic beasts that were previously gathered at the entrance of the cave had all fled away, leaving several corpses behind them. The machine gunner released the trigger only to find out that his finger joint had gone numb. Because there was no time to change the gun barrel, it had turned red, which, according to the shooting regulations, meant that it was scrapped. Their numbers were intimidating, but once we start fighting them, they didn't look so scary. The church's God's punishment army was much more fierce. They are only beasts after all. Beasts? Why are you talking nonsense? Go fight them with a bow if you dare. 3 years ago, these things were terrorizing the western region. Everything changed because of His Majesty, do you understand? Yes, Captain. Instead of celebrating, change the gun barrel. Edith was standing in the back of the battlefield. She had a thoughtful look while watching the busy yet orderly First Army. After following Roland's army to participate in the tooth extraction campaign and the church's destruction, she always tried to imagine how would she command the army in order to achieve the maximum effectiveness of the firearms. Without a doubt, this was a completely new kind of army, and so the combat strategy was different from that of the knights and the mercenaries from before. It was not easy to forget her previous successful experience of fighting through charging, relying on excellent weapons, and personal bravery. But when she realized that knights could no longer compete against the new army, she promptly discarded all of her previous experience and started watching all of His Majesty's actions closely. Through today's battle, she was able to verify that her thinking was basically correct. The most notable feature of the firearms was their ability to kill opponents with extreme efficiency before they could get closer without regard to the spacing between soldiers and their physical condition. Therefore, the narrower the shooting area, the more intense the firepower would be. As long as the ammunition supply did not stop, they could fire from morning to night. 2 platoons of soldiers could be arranged in a battlefield where previously only 3 to 4 knights would be able to charge from. They could only arrange 3 machine guns not because more could not fit but due to limited ammunition. But even so, their fierce firepower still made it hard for the demonic hybrids to advance. They did not even get tired or need to aim. They just had to pull the trigger. Whenever the opponents were too close together, she would even see a thick blood-red mist arising in the entrance. If His Majesty was in command, he wouldn't have done anything different. The only thing she did not understand was the behavior of the demonic beasts. Obviously, some of them had basic intelligence. When it got difficult to attack the cave entrance, many of the demonic hybrids began to wander outside the cave, occasionally howling, but still not advancing, as if they were encouraging the other demonic beasts to sacrifice themselves. But since they had the ability to think, why did they still obey the weird commanding voices? The demonic beasts apparently did not need a relationship between lords and subjects, which was about mutual support and protection. As long as they escaped into the barbarian land, they could totally survive alone, unlike humans who had to be part of a group in order to survive. Could it be that there was an inexplicable connection between the demonic beasts and the owner of that voice whose importance was above the beast's own survival? It was hard for her to imagine that. She thought she should ask His Majesty Roland after the search was completed. Currently, the only thing in Neverwinter that she found surprising and hard to figure out was His Majesty's thoughts. Whenever they were talking, she would always ponder over the same question: how vast could the human mind be? Miss Edith, you were very helpful this battle. Brian's voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned around and saw the young officer's face full of gratitude. I'll definitely mention your contribution to His Majesty in the battle report. I only did my job, Edith smiled. I wasn't sure it would be successful at that time, so you don't need to mention my suggestion in the report. Unacceptable. Brian shook his head again and again. His Majesty said that in the army, the result and not the process is the only thing that matters. A victory is a victory. If I don't mention your contribution, then I'm no different than a thief. Plus, it's also unfair to you. Fine. The Pearl of the Northern Region shrugged. If you insist. Of course. At this point, he paused and then made a military salute. Furthermore, I now understand more what you said before about trust. The First Army thanks you for your advice. I'll leave now as I also have many things to attend to. Looking at the captain leaving, Edith suddenly understood why His Majesty chose a patrol captain of the border to serve as an important military officer. Battle achievements were the basis for the knights when requesting a reward from the Lord, and the last thing they would want was to share with others. There were countless cases that involved faking and lying, and not even her trustees could resolve them. In general, though the First Army was different in many aspects, promotions and rewards were still linked to battle achievements. She was not a member of the army, so even if the other party had completely concealed this matter, she wouldn't have personally argued her case to His Majesty. To be able to calmly share with others whatever benefits he had gained just to be fair, in fact, Compared to other knights, this former patrol captain was actually much more of a knight. Loyal to his king and honest, this was probably why Roland entrusted him with such an important task. Commanding and knowledge could both be learned, but a person's character was hard to change. Edith had noticed very early on that the spirit and manner of His Majesty's First Army were completely different from those of the knights. It was something new completely. Probably the key to creating such an army was abandoning the nobles' power and selecting only civilians to enlist, coupled with the ideological education in the primary textbooks. And now, she had also left her name in the army. Half a day later, Roland received intelligence that the situation had been resolved. At this point, the 100 emergency reinforcements had already embarked on the boat while the rest of the reinforcements were also preparing their belongings, waiting for the dispatching order. Even the newcomers of the Witch Union, Annie, Broken Sword, and the rest were prepared to go support them. From the city hall to the First Army, the whole of Neverwinter was nervous as if the city had been attacked by demonic beasts, but in the end, it all proved to be just a false alarm. The messenger was, once again, Maggie. Looking at her tilted head and slightly open mouth, Roland did not know whether to laugh or cry. He took out some beef from the drawer and threw it on the table. She immediately picked it up happily. However, taking morale into account, he eventually did not order the first platoon to return but instead replaced Annie's team with Soraya and Summer in order to conduct a more comprehensive exploration of the ruins. Chapter 8:15, Discoveries and Decisions. In the next 3 days, the reports and messages about the exploration in the Great Snow Mountain had been sent back to Neverwinter one after another. Roland had felt his heart skipping a beat the moment he had heard that Nightingale had exhausted her magic power and passed out during a fight. Fortunately, she had been all right when this news had arrived. In order to reassure His Majesty, she had also asked Maggie to let Roland know that she was all right. The exploration results showed that inside the Great Snow Mountain there was indeed a city in ruins, which was left by the underground civilization. However, as compared to the maze inside the impassable mountain range, this city was not that well preserved. Most caves in the newly discovered ruins had collapsed long before, and several intact compartments were just filled with spoiled food, bug eggs and corpses. Near the underground lake, a broken magic core was found by the Tequila Witches. According to the scouting team's reports, they found no documented records there, and the best part of their journey was the discovery of an original carrier and 2 devouring worms inside the mountain. He was surprised by the results. If this monster with many eyes was just a dumb beast who happened to settle down in the ruins, he would never find its destructive behavior strange. However, it was obviously not just a stupid animal. He still remembered that something in this Great Snow Mountain had sent devouring worms to swallow Agatha's laboratory and the Blackstone Pagoda in the Devil's Town. These actions were clearly not just for food. In this exploration inside the mountain, the team had also spotted both human beings and demons trapped in the strange bug eggs. These facts made him believe that the unknown enemy must have been trying to collect information about the other 2 species it was going to fight against in the Battle of Divine Will. When he received the first batch of bug egg corpses, he noticed that their decomposed skin was apparently not caused by corrosion but corpse wax formed by long-term storage. That meant these corpses had been kept in the egg for a very long time and were apparently not stored as food. Only an intelligent individual would make other creatures into specimens. In that case, he really did not understand why the monster had destroyed this underground city. He wondered whether it was because that the monster did not care about the things treasured by Tequila Witches. He scanned through Soraya's pictures of the scenes inside the mountain and became lost in thought. He found that the moment before the monster sank into the water, its remaining hundreds of eyes seemed to be filled with resentment. He did not know whether this was a false impression or not. He felt its eyes became different when it was severely wounded. In the beginning, those eyes appearing on the cave roof were simply gazing at the witches, but after they hurt it badly, its eyes showed an obvious emotional expression. When he put those 2 pictures together to compare, he felt as if the monsters in those 2 pictures were not the same one. As for the underground lake in the bottom of the ruins, where the monster sank in, Sylvie confirmed that it was connected to a water vein leading to the swirling sea. On his current technical level, he was not able to track the enemy once it entered the swirling sea, and let this monster successfully get away. What he could do next was to block the water vein by collapsing the dome of the ruins with powerful explosives. By doing so, he could ensure the safety of Neverwinter. The exploration team had also sent him good news. In Lightning's reports, he read about some bugs. They looked the same as the egg bugs, but had once gushed out very sticky jelly to tightly trap Fran. The mucus they spat out was able to become a consolidated, sticky thing like spider silk in certain circumstances. These bugs were neither intelligent nor aggressive. According to Agatha's studies, they were not from the fertile plains. In other words, these bugs were probably brought here by the monster. However, what intrigued Roland most was not the origin of these bugs but the fact that their mucus could solidify quickly. According to Lightning's description, these bugs could be bred in captivity. Therefore, in his reply, he asked Agatha to make a detailed report on the living and eating habits of these bugs and to investigate what kind of harm they might cause. He also required the team to collect the strange plants and fungi in the ruins. He was particularly interested in the fruits which gave out dim, cold light in the dark and the giant mushroom as big as an adult. When he was about to review the wonderful pictures of the underground caves, someone knocked on his door. Phyllis walked into his office. She bowed and said, "Your Majesty, Lady Pasha would like to talk to you about the ruins." He immediately nodded to agree. He had sent all the exploration reports of these days to the tequila survivors, and he also really wanted to hear the ancient witch's views of the monster. "Good, let's hold a video meeting." "Vi, what?" Phyllis was stunned and took a few seconds to realize what it was. "You mean a meeting through the phantom instrument?" "Yes, in the usual place at the reception hall on the first floor." He could not help but grin as he was so happy to finally find someone who could understand his nonsense. "I got it." She laughed and said, "I'm going to inform Pasha." When he walked to the reception hall, Faldi and all the other God's punishment witches all rose and bowed to him with both hands on the chest as if they were saluting a higher ascendant. They looked solemn, and were completely different from the they looked in the dream world. Since he had taken them into his dreamland, he was now venerated as someone similar to the three chiefs of the Union. He could tell from their etiquette and attitude toward him that now they did not consider him as a common man anymore, though they still used the phrase common people to describe his subjects. Though they had agreed not to care too much about etiquette as he had required, they still saluted him more formally than his own guards. Seeing this, he had no choice but to let them do whatever they wanted. Inside the hall, he saw Pasha through the light curtain waiting for him. "First of all, I have to express my sincere gratitude to you," she said while bending her main tentacle. "Your help is of great importance to Tequila in exploring the ruins and in restoring the God's punishment witch's lost feelings. I'm helping myself by helping you since we'll be fighting together in the upcoming Battle of Divine Will," he replied with a smile. "Well, what are you going to do with the newly discovered shells in the ruins?" "There are only two ways to deal with them. Moving them here or moving the soul instrument to where they're located." She paused to think for a minute and continued. "I prefer the second method. When the magic core was turned off, it would look like some dry skeleton. He could use a concrete boat to carry it, but he was afraid that he could not transport shells, even empty ones, in this way. The big blob and worms were too scary for the common people. He was clear that the universal education of Neverwinter had not yet prepared them to accept these dreadful shells that looked like monsters from hell. Roland agreed with Pasha's suggestion of the second method, though the transportation of the instruments still posed a problem. "So have you picked out the witches who are willing to accept the soul transfer?" Half a month ago, Tequila survivors had been eager to search for ruins left by the underground civilization in the Great Snow Mountain, since they had earnestly hoped to find new shells in the ruins. Most of the God's punishment witches at that time had longed to merge with them to regain their long-lost feelings, such as touch, taste and smell, even though they had known that by doing so, they would look like monsters and would never change back into human forms. However, now the situation was different, as they had another choice. Chapter 8:16, Deep Sea Demons. Now everyone in the third border city knew that a god's punishment witch could regain her appearance and feelings when she entered the dream world by cutting off her consciousness. Roland had repeatedly heard Phyllis describe their enthusiasm for the dream world. According to her, every time she got back to the underground, they would follow her and keep asking about her experiences in that world. He wondered whether they would still be eager to merge with shells when they found out this new method to restore their feelings. However, it was not a perfect solution to their problem, as they could only regain their appearance and feelings in their sleep. By contrast, being in shells, they could always have some feelings, and these shells were almost immortal unless they were heavily damaged. It would be difficult to make a choice between these two alternatives. He thought of another possibility for them. If they had kept the news about the dream world a secret, they would have been able to send the instrument and God's punishment witches there to carry out their soul transfer. This way, the volunteers would never be able to go back even if they regretted afterwards. However, he believed that Pasha would not delude her witches into accepting the shells. Based on his observation in the past month, though the tequila witches had lived in seclusion for hundreds of years, they did not turn into a conservative organization. They were still open to new things and had abolished class inequality in their group. Apparently, the sacrifice of the 3 chiefs had deeply moved them, and the threat posed by demons had kept them working to make greater progress. Pasha seemed to read his mind. You don't have to worry about this problem. With more shells, we'll be better equipped to defeat the demons. Original carriers can operate the magic core, and devouring worms can speed up the construction of the defense line. They'll do everything to win the upcoming Battle of Divine Will without hesitation. In fact, the volunteers have decided to go to the Great Snow Mountain together with the instrument. Volunteers aren't afraid of any sacrifice, Roland thought while biting his lips. It seems that I've worried too much. I'll send ships to transport the instrument for you when the exploration is finished. Thank you for helping us, she said happily. He nodded and laid Soraya's pictures on the table. All the information I've sent you before were written materials. I finally received these pictures of the ruins today. I would like to know your thoughts on this monster. Please wait for a moment. She waved her tentacles to summon Selene and Aletheia, who had been repairing the instrument of divine retribution. 3 blobs came to the light curtain to study the pictures together. With their tentacles connected, they remained silent for an unexpectedly long time, and communicated through their minds. As they were not able to show any expression on the outside, he felt as if this video call had already disconnected. After a long time, he finally heard Pasha in his head again. Sorry to have kept you waiting. We're shocked by some pictures, so we have to discuss them thoroughly. It's neither a demonic beast nor a demon, right? Yes, said Selene, and the skeleton that fell into the water has appeared in Lady Natalia's description about the divine land. Are you sure? Yes. We've stayed underground for hundreds of years, but we would never be so foolish as to forget such an important piece of information. In fact, carriers have a much better memory than human beings, said Aletheia, grumpily. Lady Natalia saw the sea and skeletons in the 3rd painting scroll. This thing in the pictures matches her description. More importantly, this lake is connected to the sea. We can be sure it's the thing mentioned by Lady Natalia. So, now we can say it's from the unknown civilization? He asked while touching his chin. He was not surprised at their conclusion. When he had found the devouring worm also swallowing things in the Devil's Town, he had suspected that it must have been sent by some neutral party who had decided not to help anyone in the Battle of Divine Will. Alternatively, it could also have been the unknown enemy in the upcoming battle. He had made up this exploration plan not only to help the tequila survivors but also to eliminate hidden threats for Neverwinter and spy on the unknown enemy. He had read a similar description in Zero's memory fragment, but it was vague. Now, as the tequila witches also thought the monster belonged to the unknown enemy, he could confirm that suspicion. It's highly possible, but... Pasha hesitated for a while and continued. There are still many things we don't understand, such as the demonic beasts. These beasts across the land of dawn are mutated animals. They should have been affected by the erosion of magic power, just like witches. But why did they follow this monster's orders? It's different from the demons who enslave the demonic hybrids. The beasts seem to willingly obey this monster's orders. Roland had also pondered over this question. He thought that if the unknown enemy were intelligent creatures who had demonic beasts as part of their civilization, they would have accumulated these hybrids first and then used them to eliminate both human beings and demons. He could not understand why the unknown civilization wasted these beasts in the months of demons every year. Maybe the origin of those mutated beasts might not be as simple as they had believed. We'll know the answer when the Battle of Divine Will starts. He shrugged his shoulders, pretending to be relaxed. They'd better be the monster's relatives. In that case, we'll never see these ugly beasts on the snowy plains after we have defeated all our enemies in the battle. Pasha was stunned and then started to chuckle. Yes, you're right indeed. No matter where they come from, we'll still have to defeat them in the Battle of Divine Will. After that, they discussed the defense line construction project and the method to block the underground river in the newly discovered ruins. When the meeting was about to finish, Roland suddenly raised a question. Ah, yeah, as we've caught some clues left by the hidden civilization now, we have to give it a name, don't we? He cleared his throat. Just like what we did with the first painting scroll. We call the guys in it demons. Is this important? Pasha tilted her main tentacle. Demons is just their most widely known name. They were also called blood beasts, the deformity or polluters back in the Union. Of course, a proper name is very important for propaganda and motivational campaigns. We should make it sound as evil as possible so as to arouse the people's indignation. So, do you have any idea? Well, since these hidden enemies stay in the sea for most of the time, shall we call them sea monsters? All the people in the meeting fell silent. Isn't that good? I thought the name the Third Border City was bad enough. I never expected you to make up something even worse, Aletheia mocked. Sea monster? It sounds like a giant octopus. Aletheia. Pasha moved her main tentacle to give Aletheia a knock on the head. Your Majesty, if you think it's all right. I think we don't have a problem with it. The ancient witch agreed on the name, but reluctantly. Roland picked up his cup to sip some tea whilst trying to conceal his embarrassment. Ahem. Scroll, who was by his side and taking notes for this meeting, coughed suddenly. Your Majesty, how about calling them deep sea demons? Deep sea demons? He repeated. Yes, since the concept of demons has been deeply rooted in the hearts of the people, they'll understand what this new name refers to without us clarifying. This way, we don't need much efforts to describe the unknown civilization for the people. It's better for the City Hall to carry out the propaganda campaigns, and the people won't feel that we've got to fight many enemies at the same time, explained Scroll, with a quill in his hand. Though he was unwilling to accept the fact that someone else came up with a better name, he still twitched his mouth and said, It seems to be a little better. Let's use this name. Now the civilization depicted in the second painting scroll got a formal name. Chapter 8:17, Meeting Ashes Again. Lorgar slowed down when she saw the first forest in her journey. For the first time ever, she set foot in the domain of a northern kingdom. She had heard many people describing the evergreen woodlands, flourishing grasslands, and steadily flowing water in this place. According to them, one would feel how soft and moist the soil was by simply inserting a hand in it, and would never have to worry about being bitten by some hidden sandworm when fetching water. The north was said to be a place full of life and vitality, like the southernmost region in the past. However, she did not feel the same way about this place. She thought perhaps it was still the months of demons, so this domain did not look any greener the Iron Sands City's big oasis. The trees here had nothing but stark branches, and the ground was covered by withered weeds. Only the dark brown soil under her feet reminded her that this place was not a desert. She looked around and quickly found a place of shelter from the wind. In this shelter, she transformed back into a girl and put on her clothes. After that, she continued to track the caravans by following their smell that was left in the air. That was how she traveled these days. When night fell, she would transform into a wolf and run toward the north. She lived on sandworms and giant scorpions and had even attracted some desert wolves along the way. In the daytime, she would walk on the silver stream trade route in her human form. This way, she could get her water bag refilled when she ran into some merchants there. Her journey was not smooth sailing all the time. Princess Lorgar of the Wildflame clan was always generous, thus she would attract some people who were coveting her bag of gold royals. But she had vigilant ears that were erected on her head, so she was always able to know the merchants' ulterior motives in advance. At the very beginning of her journey, she had made all the vicious guys pay a bitter price, but now she decided just to follow those caravans from a distance and use the smell they left to confirm their direction. Half a day later, she heard the sound of sea waves. As this new harbor town built by the Northern Kingdom did not have fixed city walls, she could see everything clearly by standing on a high slope. Tents stood along the river. Many people gathered near the sea and seemed to be busy with constructing some square, flat buildings. What she found most surprising about this bustling scene was that most of the workers were northerners. She could only see a small number of Majins there. Shortly after stepping onto the territory of Port of Clearwater, she found the First Army's camp. She identified herself to the guards and soon met the black-haired woman again. This woman she had been eagerly looking forward to seeing was Ashes. Before she could think about what to say, Ashes opened her mouth and said calmly, "I knew you'd come." Her golden eyes gave the wolf girl a feeling of familiarity, making her feel as if they had just said goodbye to each other yesterday. Lorgar could not help but shake her ears. "How did you know?" "Because you're just like the old me." Ashes curled her lips into a smile. "In your heart, there's a goal you want to pursue." Her eyes lit up immediately. "You were pursuing combats, too." "No. I just wanted revenge." The extraordinary shook her head and turned away. "Come with me. Echo will be very happy to see you again." "Revenge?" Lorgar was stunned and thought to herself. After a while, she finally realized that Ashes had just meant that they both had goals but not the same one. The wolf girl caught up with the extraordinary and asked, "Who did you want to get back at?" "Church of Hermes." Ashes shrugged. "At first, I did this just to vent my hatred. As time went by, it became a habit until I met Her Highness Tilly. She made me see that there were more important things in this world than killing all the church people." When Ashes mentioned Her Highness Tilly, the wolf girl perceived a feeling of tenderness in her tone, which was rare for the extraordinary. She guessed this Tilly who was able to change such a determined and strong-willed person must have been very uncommon. She secretly bore this name in her mind. When they passed a flat building under construction, Lorgar raised another question. "I heard that the Port of Clearwater has become burned ruins ever since the Queen of Clearwater left this area. These people aren't local refugees, are they? Why do they seem to outnumber the Majin immigrants?" "Of course, they aren't. They all come from Neverwinter." The wolf girl could hardly believe what she had heard. "Neverwinter, you mean the domain of King of Grey Castle, Roland Wimbledon? He ordered his own people to build residences for the Majins here? He didn't need to force anyone. All of these people came here voluntarily because the construction project here pays them better. They can get a pay raise of 5 to 10 silver royals by working here." The workers said that soon after the Ministry of Construction issued a recruitment notice for this project, City Hall was packed with applicants. The Ministry of Construction? City Hall? The wolf girl felt lost hearing these strange words. She wagged her tail and asked, "What about the Sand Nation?" Lorgar remembered the first batch of immigrants consisted of several small clans and were about 2,000 to 3,000 people. She wondered why the great chief still wanted to send his own people traveling all the way from the north to the southernmost region when he had so many Majins to work for him. She started to doubt his true motives. As His Majesty wants to build a new city in Endless Cape, most Majins went there, Ashes answered quickly, so did the people from Osha clan. Only by participating in the construction task could the Majins get new homes and food supply just like the subjects of Neverwinter. Lorgar was surprised to hear that the king planned to build a city in the uninhabited wasteland which had no oasis. If it was not for Ashes, a proud person who was loath to lie, she would never believe this. What's the king of Grey Castle thinking about, she wondered. Then, what about the people who are unable to go there? If they've got to stay due to health problems, they can help the construction team here to build the Port of Clearwater. By doing so, they'll get the same treatment. In other words, as long as you're willing to work, you'll never have to worry about going hungry. Ashes sighed with mixed feelings. Her Highness Tilly once said that the ideal world in her mind was a place where you reaped what you sowed and made a fortune by your own hard work instead of exploiting the others. It sounded incredible, but her useless brother did make it happen. Lorgar automatically ignored the last comment made by Ashes. But, why does the great chief want to build a city in Endless Cape? That place has nothing. There's Blackwater. His Majesty wants to collect as much of it as possible, Ashes said while spreading out her palms. That's the reason? The wolf girl was stunned, rooted to the ground. He did so much work just to collect Blackwater? He can simply buy it from the Iron Sand City, just like the Queen of Clearwater used to do. Lorgar did not believe in goodwill for no apparent reason. Most dominators just wanted wealth and lands, but the king apparently was acting contrary to this principle. He gave the land to the Sand Nation and spent a lot to reclaim the desert and to station troops in this place. She believed that the money he spent on these things was enough to buy hundreds of barrels of Blackwater. If what Ashes said was true, then the king's deeds were really strange, she thought, and then started to worry about her father's decision. She expected Ashes to refute or explain further, but the extraordinary just raised her brow and said, "Yes, that's true. Who knows what the hell he's thinking?" "What?" Ashes said casually, "Even in Neverwinter, there are only a few who can understand his absurd theories. Andrea may be able to know what he's thinking. After all, they're both nobles, and their friendship is one mind and two bodies. The others probably won't be able to explain this to you. Anyway, who cares? I'm not here for him. As long as Lady Tilly thinks it's a good idea, I'll be fine with it." She stopped walking after saying these words, and then said, "Here we are." Chapter 818, The Neverwinter Power Rankings. Just like Ashes had said, Drow Silvermoon was overjoyed at Lorgar's arrival. The Osha princess immediately gave her a warm hug. The wolf girl was surprised and did not know where to put her raised hand. Usually a chief of a clan only greeted another chief with a hug. Lorgar had intended to greet the new chief of Osha clan by bowing to her with a hand on the chest, though Silvermoon was 1 or 2 years younger than her. During their conversation, the chief did not put on an air of superiority. When she heard that Lorgar was planning to go to Neverwinter with them, she immediately regarded her as a sister. She asked the wolf girl to call her Echo and happily introduced her to the new life of the witches in Neverwinter. Lorgar did not believe everything that Echo had said. According to what she knew, no matter how abundant Grey Castle's resources was, it could never eliminate hunger. She guessed the chief might be exaggerating by describing the place as a kingdom of God, where no one worried about hunger and illness which could be cured by witches. Though this was the first time she left the desert, she had heard many tales about the northern kingdoms. She knew the kingdoms were just like the Iron Sand City, where only a small group of people in high places could lead a luxurious life. She believed that as a divine lady who was no longer an heiress to the Wild Flame clan, she would never be as lucky as the Osha princess who had gained the king's appreciation. But this was not a problem for Lorgar. She just wanted to improve herself by fighting all those strong opponents in Neverwinter. When she told them that her clan also considered moving to Port of Clearwater, they did not appear pleasantly surprised as she had expected. Iron Axe, Osha's faithful dog, even knitted his eyebrows. Only Echo smiled and asked, "Really?" The Osha princess seemed excited and continued to say, "Great. As soon as the Wild Flame clan comes here, it won't be long before Port of Clearwater restores its prosperity of the past." His Majesty's goal can be achieved earlier. Ahem. Lady Echo. Iron Axe-eyed Echo. It's just their plan, and it won't necessarily come true. Ah, yes, I was too impatient. Echo smiled, slightly embarrassed. Lorgar immediately understood the reason for their cold response. As the former strongest clan, Wild Flame had more than 5,000 people in total, significantly outnumbering all the Majin immigrants here. More importantly, she believed that the Northerners must have found that these small clans who were competing with each other were much easier to control as compared to some powerful big clan. She thought that they probably never expected that a clan in the Iron Sand City would decide that quickly to move here, since the 6 big clans in the city did not have to worry that their oasis would dry up. These big clans were considered to be the most reluctant ones to leave the city, and most people even believed that they would never turn to the King of Grey Castle. She did not continue talking about this matter, for she knew that the Wild Flame clan moving here would increase the Northerners' influence and at the same time change the balance of powers in this area. She had to admit that it was not a bad thing if the Osha clan or the king failed to control the situation at that time and let her father grasp the power. After all, she was still Prince Lorgar of the Wild Flame clan. In the next few days, Lorgar would walk along Clearwater Bay whenever she got a chance. As she had met Ashes here, she was not that eager to leave for Neverwinter. She decided to use this period of time to examine carefully this evergreen land where Wild Flame decided to settle down. She soon discovered that the construction speed of Grey Castle's workers was way beyond her imagination. On the bank of the river, they built a row of hemispherical furnaces which could produce a new batch of bricks each day with a mixture of earth and river sand. And these furnaces did not burn wood but some gray-black stones shipped from the northwest. They only needed to be filled with these stones once in a day, since these stones could keep burning all day long, which seemed much better than charcoals. Brick production was the part where more Majins, mostly women and seniors, were involved. They were divided into several groups, digging earth or carrying black stones. For each basket a worker dug out or carried, the supervisor would press a mark on his or her arm. According to the Wolf Girl's observation, the marks determined how much food a worker could get each day. As for the construction work, she seldom saw Majins engage in it. The Northerners did everything. They mixed the water with some gray powder to make paste and used it when they stacked bricks. Each house was built with the same size, style, and method. She could notice new changes in these buildings almost every day. Another thing that greatly surprised her was how differently the Majins and the people from Grey Castle reacted when they saw her half-animal looks. Since leaving the Iron Sand City, she no longer covered her fluffy tail and ears. Most Majins would avoid her eyes when they saw her and try to back away from her, even though they had the same skin color. She was no stranger to this kind of reactions and was prepared for this. Whereas the people from Grey Castle did not show even the slightest bit of fear or hatred in front of her. Some braver ones even took the initiative to say hello to her and seemed to be used to this kind of looks. She was baffled by their behavior and asked Ashes about this. "Ah, you mean this? Isn't it a usual thing for the witches?" The extraordinary said while spreading out her palms. "Half human and half beast isn't a rare thing. Someone can even totally transform into a beast." She continued to explain, "For example, there's a witch named Maggie. She looks much more scary than you after transformation. However, after she acted as a rescuer several times, everyone got used to her looks. Even if you don't look human, they won't ostracize you." Lorgar wiggled her wolf ears and thought, Is that true? In that case, my determination to embrace my defects and accept my true self was not necessary at all?" She suddenly thought of another question. "Ah, are you the strongest witch in Neverwinter?" "Well..." The wolf girl did not know whether it was an illusion, but she did feel that Ashes looked more serious now. "That depends on the types of my opponents. One type of witches can wear God's Stone of Retaliation. The other type of witches usually don't wear them. They're not able to use their abilities wearing God's stones, are they?" "Yes. Without God's stone, I'm not sure I can defeat some witches in the Witch Union." "Even you can't defeat them?" Lorgar was shocked. Ashes nodded. I believe I could before they evolved, but their improved abilities were beyond common sense. They're not something you can fight with using just speed and strength. For example, there's a witch called Leaf. When you fight with her within the area controlled by her heart of forest, she'll become as powerful as the deities. It'll be extremely hard to escape from her trap in the woods, even if you were God's stone of retaliation. If I have to fight against the witches of Neverwinter, she's definitely the last one I want to meet. The wolf girl was thrilled when she heard this. Who else? Anna. Although she's not good at combat, her ability is impeccable. Without God's stone, I can't imagine how to defeat her. I mean in a duel. But since she's the most important witch in Neverwinter and Roland's sweetheart, you'll never get a chance to fight her. Ashes continued while counting on her fingers. And Nightingale. If you often challenge the Neverwinter witches, you'll definitely attract her attention. As she's touchy and has a really weird ability, you'd better avoid fighting her. Lorgar wagged her tail, imprinting the names on her memory one by one. So, what about Maggie? You said she could transform into a big beast? Yes, she'll make a well-matched rival for you in a duel, but I'd advise you not to do so. Ashes seemed to think of something and smiled meaningfully. That's because all the people who challenged her could not get rid of bad luck, and if you accidentally hurt her, you'd incur the wrath of the entire witch union. Chapter 819, A Graceful Lady. Lorgar nodded to Ashes as she considered Maggie as one of the top dogs in the witch union. In her mind, the witch was still an ugly, cruel, but very formidable beast. So, what about the witches wearing God's stones of retaliation? The wolf girl knew that once her opponent used God's stones, her ability would be significantly limited. Under such circumstances, she would not be able to freely transform all her body parts. If this opponent were just another warrior from the desert, it would be fine. However, if they were an extraordinary like Ashes, it would be impossible for her to come out on top. Her ability was useless when she was faced with such a strong witch who also wore God's stone. Given this, she had ranked Ashes as the best fighter amongst the witches from Neverwinter. The extraordinary remained silent for a while before replying. Suppose there's someone whose strength and speed is in no way inferior to those of an extraordinary. At the same time, she's an almost unlimited lifespan and will never be harmed by any injuries. Even if she suffers fatal blows, she'll be able to completely recover, given time. How strong do you think she would be? Lorgar could not help but gasp in astonishment. Being an experienced warrior herself, she was well aware of the importance of fighting skills and experience. In the holy duels, the toughest opponent to deal with wouldn't be those brave young fighters, but instead, the seasoned warriors who were in their 30s. These veterans were usually the backbone of a clan, and they often served as combat tutors and supervisors for a clan's newer generation. She would never underestimate such warriors who not only matched the younger fighters in strength but were also much more experienced, having gone through numerous life or death situations. However, when warriors turned 40, their body would inevitably become less agile, and the wounds suffered over the years would gradually accumulate and worsen. Even if their skills became more and more refined over time, they would no longer be able to move as fluidly as they once had done. Lorgar wanted to go to Neverwinter to hone her fighting skills was because she knew that there was an overpowered healing witch who could heal all sorts of injuries. Now she was more intrigued by her future trip to the western region as there was even a witch who was impervious to pain and had an unlimited lifespan. She believed that anyone who lived long enough would be able to become a very accomplished fighter. Even just thinking about going against such a warrior made her scared. No, excited. Is there really such a person in Neverwinter? Lorgar asked excitedly. Yes, there's this witch in the city who's called Phyllis, Ash replied. I've never fought her, but... But what? The extraordinary said slowly. One time when I was practicing with my sword in the castle's garden, she happened to pass by and give me a few suggestions. Later, I tried practicing again while following her pointers and found that my sword strokes did get noticeably smoother. Unfortunately, I left Neverwinter soon after and haven't gotten a chance to ask her for more pointers. Did she really only watch you practice for a short while? Lorgar's tail wagged even faster. Most tutors, even the very experienced ones, had to exchange a few moves with their students to spot the errors in their movements. That was the reason the big clans built their halls of military affairs for their fighters to train in. The more a student matched a tutor in his or her skills, the more difficult it was for the tutor to find faults within the student's techniques. Ashes was undoubtedly an excellent fighter, so the wolf girl believed that the immortal witch, Phyllis, was indeed a mighty warrior for quickly finding Ash's shortcomings just by watching her practice. Lorgar thought that now it seemed like Phyllis was the best fighter in Neverwinter. Since when it came to a real battle, no one could rely solely on the off chance that the opponent was not wearing a god stone of retaliation. She ranked Ashes as the second because she was also immune to the effects of god stones. This powerful extraordinary was the ideal role model that she was chasing after. As for the witch who was blessed with infinite life, the wolf girl believed that it was some miracle created by the three gods and that it was not something that she could ask for. Lorgar couldn't wait to find out how she would fare against these powerful fighters. She was now, even more, looking forward to her journey to the west. Ashes seemed to see through the wolf girl's mind and smiled meaningfully again. Instead of ending their conversation right there, she patted Lorgar's shoulder and slowly said, "By the way, I forget to tell you. There are over 100 witches like Phyllis in Neverwinter." "What?" Princess Lorgar of the Wild Flame clan was stunned and began to wonder, over 100 witches with infinite life? When did the miracles of the three gods start happening so frequently? Come on. Ashes curled her lips into a smile. You've still got a long way to go. You'll never have to worry about finding a suitable opponent there. Beside Ashes, Lorgar also occasionally ran into another witch, Andrea. She had witnessed this blonde witch's powerful magic longbow on the burning stage. Though she had never fought against her, she thought Ashes was quite right about her. She was a noble just like the king of Grey Castle. They were cut off the same cloth. The wolf girl always felt distance from Andrea, as if she was living in a different world. Every move Andrea made was so graceful, be it when she was talking to the others or when she was gazing far out to the sea by herself. Watching her, Lorgar began to notice that she had a lot of shortcomings in comparison to Andrea. Princess Lorgar decided to give it a try anyways and said hello to Andrea when nobody was around. The blonde witch greeted her calmly, not showing as much warmth and hospitality as Drow Silvermoon did. However, when she put forward the question that Ashes failed to answer, Andrea suddenly became enthusiastic. The blonde witch said, "As for this question, of course, Ashes wouldn't be able to tell you anything. That muscle-brained witch can barely count to 100, she knows nothing about managing a city. His Majesty Roland's policies are way too complicated. I had to ponder about them over and over before understanding their logic." She paused for a moment and asked, "But are you sure that you really want me to tell you? It's much harder to understand than fighting." "Yes." Lorgar nodded seriously. "My father said that there's a common truth in everything. Learning knowledge in other fields can also promote my fighting skills. It's obviously nonsense." Andrea rolled her eyes back and slightly sighed. "Fine, I'll tell you. If the king just buys Blackwater with gold royals as you suggested, Neverwinter will have to spend some of its wealth to get what it wants, right? All transactions in the world are like that," Lorgar confirmed. "So let's assume that these deals go flawlessly 100% of the time, and 20 years later, the king will see no change in his kingdom, except the loss of a large number of gold royals." Loss? The wolf girl was startled. "Why do you call it a loss? Doesn't his current plan cost him much more?" "Of course not." Andrea put her hair up, bent down, and started drawing on the ground with a stick. Now that the Majin immigrants in the Southern Territory have been assimilated into Grey Castle, any expenses they make will eventually be circulated back into Grey Castle's economy. This is because all the things the Majins need to buy come from Neverwinter. Therefore, the income they receive will eventually make its way into His Majesty's hands in a process known as the circular flow of income. During this process, the overall amount of wealth circulating in the kingdom will gradually grow and eventually reach an astonishing amount over that 20-year period. To achieve this, His Majesty only needs to invest in this initial stage, but even this initial investment can't be considered a loss as the wealth is circulating through the cities of the kingdom. Chapter 820, The Journey. Lorgar stared at the circles drawn by Andrea on the ground for a good while before she voiced out her thoughts. But if you want to keep this circulation going, you've got to keep investing money, so there's still a large amount of wealth that isn't in the hands of the great chief. That's it. This is what makes His Majesty different from all those other nobles, and it took me a while before I could figure out this point. Andrea then drew a larger circle around the small circles. From the very beginning, he's regarded the entire Grey Castle as his own domain. Given that, no matter which city accumulates the wealth, it still belongs to him. But he's the king, so shouldn't it be natural for him to think that way? Andrea retorted, when Wild Flame was the strongest clan, were you able to lord over clans in the Silver Stream Oasis? I'm guessing you couldn't even control the other clans inside Iron Sand City. It's the same for the Four Kingdoms. The nobles are like your clan chiefs. They won't let anyone else intervene in the affairs of their land, and neither would they consider any other noble's domain as their homeland. Lorgar remained silent for a while. We can't control our subjects simply by thinking them ours. Yes. You're much smarter than Ashes. Stay away from her in the future or your brain will be slowly filled with mud, like hers. Andrea patted Lorgar's shoulder. The key lies in the combination of military might and the implementation of His Majesty's policies. The former can discourage the nobles from having any second thoughts, while the latter will gradually help to centralize the kingdom's power. This is a brilliant innovation. What's even more amazing is that the king had already put this into practice since the beginning. Only having stayed in Neverwinter for so long can I now recognize the intricacies of this plan. It's indeed a bit complicated. Lorgar scratched her head, and she was a bit surprised. She never expected that this blonde-haired girl who usually distanced herself from the others would answer her questions so enthusiastically and in such great detail. Her guess was that Andrea might have been eagerly looking forward to sharing her findings and thoughts with someone else, but had failed to find a person to talk to. Of course, politics is 10,000 times more complicated than fighting, said Andrea, proudly, and that's just one part. The other part is that the king is going to acquire more than just wealth, he'll also have you guys. Us? This principle is much simpler. When Majin immigrants get food and houses through working for the king, they would become part of this circulation. You'll gradually get used to this lifestyle of using your wages to buy all kinds of goods and comforts produced by Grey Castle. In the end, you'll never be able to stop living in this kind of a comfortable manner and will eventually become a genuine citizen of the kingdom. Andrea impaled the wooden stick into the ground, wiped her hands clean, and stood up. This is inevitable. The oases are shrinking, and the survival of the Majin clans are being threatened. Under this circumstance, the king has offered you a way to survive without fighting each other for water, so more and more Majins will choose to leave the desert. Meanwhile, there are many deserted lands lying in the southern territory. It's only natural for the king to bring the Majin people there to reclaim those lands, and create wealth for him. She paused for a moment and asked, "Now do you understand?" By doing so, 20 years later, His Majesty Roland will not only get all the Blackwater that he desires but also an accumulated wealth as well as most of the Majins of the southernmost region. Do you still think that buying Blackwater from the Iron Sand City would be a better option? Lorgar did not answer but instead faintly felt her heartache. As compared to the answer itself, what shook her more was Andrea's attitude. She believed that Andrea revealed all the reasons behind the king's arrangements probably not out of trust, but because no Majin could reverse this situation. Lorgar admired this intelligent blonde witch who could actually figure out the king's true intentions. However, she respected the great chief himself even more. He always thought of the bigger picture and was able to become an irreplaceable figure in his subjects' hearts through meticulous planning. Not to mention his revolutionizing ideas. She believed that if he had been born in Iron Sand City, he would have definitely become an outstanding warrior. Perhaps he was the example she should chase after. Thank you for your guidance. I feel my fighting skills have been further enhanced, Lorgar said while making a fist. My pleasure, as long as you can understand. Wait, what? Did you just say fighting skills? Yes. I'll go practice now, so please excuse me, Lorgar said before she turned around without a moment to spare and hurriedly ran for a nearby dune. There just happened to be an open and gravelly ground that was suitable for combat training. So you turned out to be just like Ashes, an idiot. After running for more than 100 steps, the wolf girl still could hear Andrea call her an idiot, but the blonde witch did not sound as cold as she had been before. A week later, Echo informed Lorgar that the Wild Flame clan had officially decided to move to the Southern Territory. As agreed by both parties, this immigration plan would be carried out in 3 phases to reduce Greycastle's burden, and the lands the clan was granted with were the most fertile fields near the estuary in the Old Town, which were located between Clearwater Bay and the port. The whole migration process would last more than a year, and the first batch of immigrants would arrive in several weeks. In order to properly settle the former ruling clan, the Osha princess, who was missing Neverwinter the most, volunteered to extend her stay in the port of Clearwater. Her decision was approved by the king, but Ashes, Andrea and Hummingbird would still leave as planned, taking the Roland to the western region. As for whether Lorgar would leave with the witches or stay behind to wait for her clan, Echo allowed her to choose for herself. The wolf girl did not think twice before she chose to leave with Ashes. She believed that her father and brother could properly handle interclan affairs without her. The Southern Territory was no longer a place where survival opportunities needed to be won by force and duels. In this place, even small clans could manage to get their stomachs full, not to mention the Wild Flame clan. More importantly, she did not want to cause any misunderstanding by meeting them shortly after she abandoned her right of succession. As she had to leave sooner or later, she decided to leave earlier with the witches. The things about Neverwinter and the Witch Union which she heard from Ashes and Andrea filled her heart with wild expectations. Be it the legendary combat witches, the formidable enemies in the wilderness hiding under the cloak of the red mist, the great chief who did not have enough strength to strangle a chicken, according to Ashes, she looked forward to meeting them all. The next day, Echo sent them onto the steel ship with a smile. Standing on the deck, Lorgar felt that those large concrete boats were nothing as compared to this steady steel ship. The amount of metal used to build the hull for this ship might already exceed that of all the Majin's weapons and armors. With mixed feelings in her heart, she held the railing on the deck and dropped her fluffy ears as she nodded to Echo to say goodbye. With a deep whistle from its horn, the Roland, carrying the witches and Princess Lorgar of the Wild Flame clan, slowly but steadily sailed towards the western region. Chapter 821, A Meeting. My lord, your guest is here, said a maid who pulled the curtain and poked her head in. Send him in. Otto Luashi handed a silver royal to the bar girl beside him and said, I need a private minute with him. I'll call you later. Yes, my lord. Is this the covert place you mentioned? The man who came and removed his hood and glanced around. If I hadn't seen the Luashi guards standing outside, I would think I'd come to the wrong place. It isn't easy these days to see you. I had to take extra precautions, replied Otto, grinning. The guest was Hill Fox, a member of the emissary delegation who betrayed the King of Dawn, killed the guards and knights and escaped from the City of Glow with some fallen minions. Ever since Yorko's secret departure, Appenmoya, the King of Dawn became so furious that he claimed it was a blatant provocation to and contempt of the Kingdom of Dawn on Greycastle's part. He also said that it was a witch that killed his father and he absolutely did not allow such an evil existence in his domain. Of course, Otto knew far more than that. For example, that while Appen was searching for the witches, he also dispatched a group of knights to chase the emissary delegation. He ordered that any member of the emissary delegation, other than Yorko, could be killed on the spot, especially the witches who dared to collude with the neighbor country. At the same time, investigations were carried out in the king's city. Denise, a businesswoman who had an intimate relationship with the ambassador, was taken to the palace several times for inquiries. Hill and the others who voluntarily stayed as contacts, on the contrary, disappeared. Otto did not hear anything from Hill until a few months later when the event no longer received so much public attention. This was their first meeting after their last departure. "Would you like some drinks?" Otto patted the soft couch beside him and asked, "I guess you usually have no chance to enjoy it." Hill did not sit down. Instead, he walked to the window and looked around. "We're on the second floor. Where's the reliable path you mentioned in the confidential letter?" Otto, the eldest son of the Luoxus, sighed, stood up and opened a board under the soft couch, revealing the dark passage beneath it. "Slide down from here, you'll arrive at the back garden. In the yard, you'll find a secret door and a dry well. You can choose either way to leave." "Nobody else knows this path?" "Of course, both the back garden and the tavern belong to the Luoxus," he said, shrugging. "No wonder Sir Yorko said you're a fox. You're still as cautious as you were before." "If I were not like this, I'm afraid I would have been hanged on a gallows now," replied Hill, who took a coin from his pocket and dropped it down the tunnel. After listening to the sound for a while, he closed the board. "If you want to tell me any information in the future, write me an encrypted letter. It's not safe to meet in this way. But an encrypted letter is also not safe for me. If the information in the palace is leaked, King Appin will certainly suspect our families." Otto sighed and said, "He's no longer my good friend who talked about everything with me." Hill raised his eyebrows without denying. "Does the King of Dawn have any new plan?" "He intends to attack the Church of Hermes and avenge for his father." Otto slowly told him what he heard during the court meeting. Although the ministers tried to dissuade him, His Majesty still persisted. "Now they start to collect grains in the City of Glow. When snows melt after the months of demons, he'll immediately take actions. The royal knightage will go together with Duke Carb, who is in charge of the western field. No wonder the porridge is a bronze royal more expensive than before. Fortunately, the supplies in the Kingdom of Dawn are rich enough. If it were in Grey Castle, the Lord would not prepare for the war during the months of demons unless he wanted to trigger riots." Hill said meditatively, "Is there any problem with Hermes?" Otto knew why he asked. Though the church and Grey Castle had a battle on Cold Wind Ridge and it was said that the Holy City was severely defeated, later it was reported that both of them retreated to their own domain. The ministers all agreed that the church might have suffered heavy losses, but had not been completely defeated. Otherwise, the king of Grey Castle should have led his army to loot the Holy City. As the core city of the church, it should be where all the wealth church had accumulated for hundreds of years was. Maybe Appin was deeply impressed with the gods' punishment warriors brought by the pure witches. He just dispatched more scouts for further information without any further actions. Since he changed his mind, it was possible that he had discovered something there. As for whether it was to avenge for his father or take advantage of the chaos, it did not matter at all. His Majesty didn't tell us many details. But I heard from the businessmen coming back from the west that many refugees appeared in the old holy city. Refugees? Hill nodded while rubbing his chin. I'll report this to Neverwinter. There's one more thing. Otto hesitated for a while and said, in the court meeting last month, the Minister of Foreign Affairs mentioned Grey Castle. He said that Roland Wimbledon could not be counted as the real ruler of Grey Castle, as he hasn't either held enthronement or lived in the palace. What's more, many nobles in Grey Castle oppose him, especially in the eastern region. Since he trampled on the alliance of the two countries, the Kingdom of Dawn needs to be cautious of him and suppress his power. For example, we should support those nobles to resist the rule of Wimbledon. Well, Hill immediately became serious and asked, what did the King of Dawn respond? His Majesty did not respond immediately, but his expression showed that he has a great interest in the matter. Otto did not know why he told these things to Hill, or to Roland. Judging from the current situation, he could see the relationship between Grey Castle and Dawn was deteriorating. He should have stood on the side of Appin Moya, just as the family of Luoshi had assisted John Moore's royalties for generations. But he could not persuade himself to accept His Majesty's policy. killing all witches meant that Andrea Quinn should also be killed, who was definitely not evil as Appin described. He had tried many times to explain the differences between witches and pure witches from the church to His Majesty, but his explanations were futile. Appin no longer regarded him as his hand. Otto also found that although he still addressed Appin as His Majesty, he did not have the same respect as he had for the old king. He had pondered over it for a long time. Maybe he admitted that he was unable to change the situation and had to put his hope on Grey Castle. In Neverwinter, he met Andrea, who had a free and easy life. In order to let her continue to have such a life, he hoped that Roland's rule could continue. "I see," said Hill in a lower voice. "Don't worry. His plan won't succeed." Otto nodded, took a deep breath and asked, "Then, can you tell me how Miss Quinn is doing these days?" Chapter 822, Traitors. "She's fine. She lived on the sleeping island in Fjords for a while and has returned to Neverwinter now." Hill laughed and said, "I heard that Miss Quinn is especially close to Princess Tilly, His Majesty's sister. So His Majesty will definitely treat her as a distinguished guest." Afterwards, Hill told him some trivia about Andrea. Otto learned that Andrea loved playing cards and improving her marksmanship. She occasionally argued with another card-playing buddy, but on the whole, she got along well with them. Her news made him nearly forget about the passage of time. Until he heard arguments outside the room. What happened? Hill stopped talking and quickly walked to the door, peeping through the door slot, and then he said, "Something is wrong on the first floor. Let me send someone to check it." Otto indicated Hill to sit down first. He then yelled toward the outside, "Who's making noise outside? Go to see what happened." "Yes, my lord," replied the maid who had been at the door. "Maybe someone is drunk." He then said to Hill, drawing the blanket on him, "It's unusual, but does happen in the tavern. You mentioned Miss Quinn participated in a Neverwinter hunting competition. Who won?" Instead of replying, Hill raised a finger to his lips as a sign of silence and gently leaned his ear on the door. After a few seconds, his face clouded over. "Those people downstairs are armored and armed." "What?" Otto was a little stunned. "I heard the sounds of iron boots and sword hilts hitting the ground and chairs. Do you think anyone would wear a full set of armor when drinking?" Hill no longer waited for the maid but directly opened the soft couch. "I don't think a drunk would like to dress up as a knight. We're in trouble." How is it possible?" Otto frowned and said, "Please believe me. I absolutely didn't." "Of course. If I didn't trust you, I wouldn't be here," Hill interrupted. "Well, we can meet next time. You leave first. If they're really coming for you, I can stop them." Otto replied. "After this meeting, I don't know when I will learn about Andrea again," he thought regretfully. "Won't you leave with me?" Hill was slightly surprised and asked, "Apparently, they aren't coming for a visit. You'd better go back to your own domain. Rest assured. I'm the eldest son of Luashi family. They can't do anything to me." Otto shook his head. He did not tell his father that he tried to rescue witches and secretly contacted Roland's scouts. If people outside the room came to search for the emissary delegation members while he ran away, it might raise the suspicion of the king. Then he would really be in trouble. No one knows the secret path, but it isn't difficult to find it. If they saw an empty room, they would be suspicious. I'll stay in the room. Only in this way can you withdraw more safely. Then, good luck." Hill did not insist. He loosed his hands and slid into the secret path. Otto rearranged the blanket and quilt and lay on the soft couch again. A short while later, he heard heavy patters of footsteps at the staircases accompanied by the scraping of metal. The maid who left to inquire about the situation never appeared again. Without knocking or asking for admission, they directly broke in. A group of full-armored knights rushed into the room. "What are you doing?" Otto furiously questioned. "This is the private property of Earl Luashi. Are you planning to commit treason?" He intended to stand up and drive the rude knights out of the tavern. Out of his expectation, the knight stepped forward and tightly pressed him on the soft couch. "I'm sorry, sir. We aren't committing treason, but you are," the leading knight replied, shrugging. Though they wore the gold armors and royal knightage emblems on their chests, Otto found that he had never met this group of knights. "Hell, where did they come from? Let me go!" He struggled and shouted, "That's a slander." "Say this to His Majesty," said the knight. "You failed to live up to his trust, my lord." When he heard the name Appenmoya, Otto's heart suddenly sank. It was 2 days later when he saw His Majesty again. "I heard that you haven't eaten anything for 2 days, but insist to see me?" Appen said. He still seemed to be a little weary, but looked more mature. His eyes revealed emotions which Otto was unfamiliar with. "Now your requirement is satisfied. Start to eat." "Where am I?" Otto asked in a hoarse voice, hands on the steel bars. "Why did you do so? What did you do to my father? Are you not satisfied with the room?" Appen said, looking around, "It's decorated according to your room in the Duke Mansion. It's not large, but you have a bed, a desk, chairs, and a bookcase. I think you can live a comfortable life here." He paused and said, "As for where it is, of course, it's under the palace. I can only feel at ease when you're kept here." Otto gritted his teeth and said, "Your Majesty, I need to talk to you." "I didn't betray me?" The King of Dawn interrupted him. "Do you think I'll still believe these lies and continue to be deceived by you? It took me 2 months to find some clues about the witches. I have never thought that you were actually involved. You asked Yorko, the ambassador of Grey Castle, to black money to participate in the auction, and also helped him leave the city of Glow. Wasn't that betrayal?" He raised his voice, as he apparently did not want to suppress his anger anymore. "That day in the palace, didn't you hear how the king of Grey Castle abandoned the covenant and trample on my father's feelings? Aye. Do you want to talk about the traitors or the witches who should go to hell?" Appen asked in a tone full of hatred. "Enough, Otto Luashi. If you were not my friend since childhood, the eldest son of the 3 noble families, I would have long sent you to the gallows. I still need the support of the 3 families now. But that doesn't mean I need you forever. This is my last chance for you. Don't force me to do that." Otto's heart sank at his words. He had never seen his playmate show such a ferocious look. Thinking of those royal kites he never saw before, he suddenly understood something. Perhaps they had lost the trust of the new king since the death of the old king. "But the way, you just asked what happened to your father." Before leaving, Appen suddenly said in a cold voice, "Nothing happens to him. He still attended today's court meeting. As long as you eat food, Earl Luashi will still be a good loyal noble. Stop this stupid hunger strike. That's good for both of us. If you persist, I have to take the hard way." Chapter 8:23, Dark Clouds over Hermes. Although it was snowing slightly, it was a fair day in the northern region. Nail was rubbing the oil stick on the gun barrel out of sheer boredom. He occasionally glanced at the impassable mountain range with the telescope. Since they had been stationed here, he did not observe the mountain as frequently as he did before. He usually checked it 2 or 3 times a day and spent the rest of time on maintaining the flintlock and chatting with his companions. Maintenance of weapons required a person to be detail-oriented. Every half a month or so, they would get a portion of a thumb-long oil stick wrapped in hard paper. It was heard that the oil stick was made of abandoned oil from the soap factory. When they used it, they needed to heat it up and then rub it onto the special double-ended brush, which had a large and a small brush on either end, to be inserted into the gun barrel and cartridge. In the past, every squad was equipped with only 1 set of cleaning tools. But nowadays, as there were more and more factories and workshops in Neverwinter, the brushes became accessories to the guns and everyone had one. Of course, when there was no bonfire, they could heat the oil stick by body or mouth temperature. Though the soldiers in the First Army was forbidden to eat the abandoned oil, some people still secretly rubbed it on their dried food as a seasoning. As a squad leader, he usually chose to turn a blind eye. After all, the teams responsible for guarding the northern region were basically veterans. Some of them were even over 20 years older than him. If he had not attended the primary education class, he would not be selected as the squad leader. He could only smile to those who used to be his neighbors in the past. After assembling the parts one by one, the rifle became shiny again. He pressed the trigger several times to ensure the empty gun could shoot normally before he once again checked the front. He was still unable to forget the defense battle in autumn. Once he closed his eyes, the image of that young woman wearing a red coat would emerge in his mind. It was in this blockhouse that he witnessed her death. He knew that she was an enemy and a pure witch of the church, but her struggling in the gunshots still made him uncomfortable. If it were not Iron Axe's command and his loyalty to His Majesty, he would have chosen to leave the army and return to his previous job as a steam engine operator in the mining area. Although he still served in the First Army, Nail made up his mind to leave the machine gun team and instead became an observer who protected machine gunners. He knew that he was deceiving himself, but he had no other way to overcome the obstacle in his heart. The battlefield, which had been soaked with blood, was restored to the ordinary look as if nothing had happened. The barbed wires had long been removed, leaving only a dozen of crooked stakes. Trenches were also filled with snow. If there were no blockhouses, one could not distinguish this field from the wild field around. Aside from them, no one knew that over 2,000 people had once died here, just several hundred meters in front of the first line of stakes. "Chief, we're running out of firewood." "Let me go to fetch some," said a soldier who was nearly as young as Nail. The firewood he mentioned was the stakes once used to fix the barbed wires. He said, "Otherwise the other squad will blame us for not adding more firewood after using it. But it's duty time now." Nail shook his head and said, "You may be seen by others." "They won't say anything," another veteran said, laughing. "It's so cold today. No one will care if we go to get firewood to warm us up. It has been several months since the cowards of the church retreated. Do you think they'll come today?" His words were agreed by everyone else. Nail also knew the veteran was right. At first, Iron Axe required 500 soldiers in the camp keeping stationed at the foot of Cold Wind Ridge to guard against the last struggle of the church or the invasion of the demonic beasts. However, to their surprise, no enemies appeared. Maybe the superiors believed that enemies would not come, so they transferred over 200 soldiers to other places and divided the rest of soldiers into patrol teams, whose mission was to stay in the blockhouses to monitor in the northwestern direction in turns. Nail hesitated but finally agreed with that soldier. He said, "You alone will be too slow. Go there with more people." The soldier whistled and replied, "Yes, head." Nail turned back and picked up the telescope to look toward the snow-covered field. What he could see was the white snow. Nothing changed. Just when he was about to wipe his pistol, he suddenly saw 2 or 3 dark spots which were especially striking in a white background. He was startled, and then shouted, "Wait!" The soldiers who had reached the stairs stopped immediately, and the others around the stove hurriedly stood up and drew close. "What's wrong?" Nail wiped the lens with his wool neckline and looked back in the northwestern direction. He saw more dark spots. He held his breath and observed them for a moment, only to find that they were a group of people slowly walking in the snow. "Blow the horn to alert the soldiers. Someone is approaching the front." Woo, 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 woo. As the horn sounded, the entire camp was seething at once. With a rifle in his hand, Nail led his squad members out of the blockhouse and stood in a line around the blockhouse, placing their gun barrels on the sandbags covered with snow. As the trench was filled with snow, they had to shorten the front line, assisting the heavy machine gun to defend. "Are they from the church?" someone asked. "Who else will come?" muttered the former veteran unhappily. "Cold Wind Ridge has long been abandoned by His Majesty. Only people in Hermes will come from that direction. I underestimated their guts. I hope they're not the monster-like warriors. We don't have the support of the artillery battalion this time. We have nothing to be afraid of. I don't believe they can run quickly in the heavy snow." The veteran spat. If they were armors, they'll sink in the snow and become our targets. Head, their distance? At least 1,000 meters away, replied Nail, frowning at the suspicious group. It's so strange. Something is wrong. What's wrong? They aren't like the God's punishment army. Does the church send the judgment army? All soldiers were relieved. If they were just ordinary judgment warriors, it would be impossible for them to approach in the crossfire of machine guns on the blockhouse. No, not the judgment army. They're not armored. Actually, they're so ragged, said Nail, holding the telescope, and said in surprise, Gosh, how did these people come down from the mountain? They're like a group of refugees. Or maybe the God's punishment warriors disguised as refugees, the veteran shrugged. Hey, where are you going? I'm going to tell them to stop. Nail said without turning back, otherwise, the other squads will shoot them. Chapter 8:24, The Symbol of the Fall. As he approached the front, he could clearly see the group of refugees without the telescope. Men, women, old men, and children. They were all ragged and staggering, looking weak and frail. They were even weaker than common militia, not to mention the judgment army. Nail was more sure about his judgment. But he knew that the church had a pill which could enhance the taker's physical strength within a second. Considering that they might use the berserk pills, Nail told his squad members to hold up the heavy machine guns within the suppressing shooting range before he approached alone and shouted, This is the border defense line of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. You're forbidden to step forward. Freeze, or we'll fire. Apparently, those people also saw him. They did not stop moving, instead, they accelerated their pace in excitement. Nail shot twice upward and repeated his warning, but they continued to run toward him. Mr. Nail, come back! Cried the veteran behind him. They don't even know what flintlocks are. They won't stop no matter how loud you shout. Hearing that, Nail hurriedly shouted that he would shoot arrows, and those people finally responded. Nevertheless, after a moment's hesitation, they continued to move forward and waved both hands toward the First Army, yelling while running. He could only tell that they were crying for help. No, stop! Nail was still trying to stop them until he was dragged back to the defensive line by his teammates. When those people crossed the first line of stakes, flames spurted from the two blockhouses at the same time. Whistling bullets flew overhead and fell near the stakes, splashing snow dust and submerging their cries. There was immediately a mist of blood among the crowd. This time they finally stopped moving forward. Except for the refugees who had been shot and fell, the others fell on their knees one after another and then threw themselves down in the snow. Terrified as they were, they did not turn around. It seemed that they were more afraid of some even more dreadful things behind them. Stop! Stop! Don't fire! Nail took off his jacket, got up and waved toward the blockhouses, risking being hit by a stray bullet. The machine gun squads finally released their triggers. Probably they noticed his strange move. Two more squads left the blockhouses and approached the front line. Walking through the still smoky field, a 5-man squad held the rifles, followed Nail, and slowly approached the strangers. Those strangers were trembling but dared not to move again in spite of the chilling snow. Where are you from? No one answered. Haven't you heard the question of our squad leader? Cried the veteran. If you don't answer it, you'll be treated as spies and hanged. My lord, someone finally spoke this time. We all came from Hermes. So you're believers of the church? Nail asked, frowning. Yes. No, we aren't, answered the man, banging his head on the ground again and again. In the past, we were deceived by the church. But we regret now. The deities did not protect the church. We were wrong. Please give us some food. His words stirred up the crowd. They begged, My lord, please give us some oatmeal. My child is starving. The army of the church was after us. We had to drop our luggage. My lord, I haven't eaten anything for 3 days. So they would rather be shot by machine guns than run away? Nail thought. He could not bear to look at the withered faces and bleeding bodies. After they fled from the holy city, Grey Castle was their only hope to survive. He reached his dried food in his waist pocket and was about to throw it to them while a veteran grabbed him by his wrist. "Hey, what are you doing? Give them some food." "Are you sure? These guys are believers of the church." The veteran lowered his voice and stressed, "They're our enemies." "But now they aren't. Didn't you hear it? They admitted that they had been deceived." Deceived? The veteran replied disdainfully, "When they can't survive, they'll even worship demons. Compared with those Judgment Army soldiers fighting for the church, these people are just timid drifters." "Head, Uncle Sang is right. Maybe they made the weapons and armors used by the church army. Who knows whether they've hurt the First Army? They deserve it. That's what they'll end up with since they've fought against His Majesty. I'll definitely not give any food to them." Nail took a deep breath and made a gesture to tell them to be quiet. He said, "Listen to me. We all know what Border Town was like before His Majesty came. At that time everyone was deceived by the church. But His Majesty didn't abandon us or treat us as betrayers. Then how could we despise them? Of course, I agree that we should spare none of those who committed a crime. Give them some food, and then bring them for interrogation. That's what we should do." Well. And His Majesty once said in his book that the kingdom of Grey Castle is a whole. As long as someone isn't guilty and is willing to pay allegiance to Grey Castle, he should be treated as a subject of the king, rather than being persecuted and excluded. Nail continued to say, "If there are innocent people among them and we watch them die in front of us, aren't we against His Majesty's wish?" The crowd fell into silence for a moment. Then the veteran grinned and said, "Head Nail, now I know why Sir Blair chose you as our squad leader. You've become so different since you went to school. In the past, you always stumbled when speaking in front of a crowd. If Ironhead knows it, he'll be proud of you." Apparently, he did not agree with Nail's remark that anyone who pays allegiance to Grey Castle is the subject of Grey Castle, but since everyone in the First Army admired King Roland, they did not oppose Nail's decision anymore. The veteran said, "But you can't directly throw food to them. That'll cause a chaos. Pick up some starving ones and order them to come up one by one." As more and more soldiers came, Eagle Face, the deputy battalion commander who was in charge of Northern Region Garrison, also came to the front line. This tall man, who had round eyes and a pointed mouth like a gray eagle of Western Region, was one of the excellent hunters who joined the militia with Iron Axe. He asked, "Can someone explain what happened?" Nail stepped forward and saluted, and then briefly told him the incident. "Escape from the Holy City?" Eagle Face asked thoughtfully. He ordered them to bring a refugee forward and said, "What happened in Hermes? If you tell me the situation in details, I can give you food." My lord." The refugee nervously swallowed and replied, "The cathedral of the new holy city collapsed." "What?" Nail was shocked for a moment. He had heard that the Hermes Cathedral was a symbol of the immortality of the church. Before the completion of His Majesty's miracle building, the tower had been the tallest building built by mankind. At the start of the defensive battle under the Cold Wind Ridge, he also had dreamed to follow His Majesty into the Hermes Plateau and occupy the tower that could reach the skies in the legend. But this magnificent building did not exist anymore. I heard that a big pit suddenly appeared below the church and the entire tower fell. The refugee stumbled, the Judgment Army blocked the scene, but a big building disappeared without a trace, and the mighty bang. Everyone knew what happened. The church is over, my lord, the deities no longer favor it. The outside residents have begun to flee. We were a little later, and then we ran into the Judgment Army who was chasing us. Among the hundreds of people, only we escaped. That means the holy city is a mess now." A mess. That man nodded and said, "Beside the western gate, the southern and east gates are also open and unguarded. Obviously, the guards have also run away. I heard that the situation in the old holy city is even worse. I really haven't seen any caravans come into the city for a long time. Got it. You're excused. After the soldiers took the men away, Eagle Face looked excited. This is an unexpected good news. Maybe we'll occupy Hermes before the arrival of the army. Nails naturally knew why the deputy battalion commander was glad about. If he became the first commander to lead the army into the holy city, it would undoubtedly be his great achievement. But Nail did not pay much attention to whether he would win more achievements. Instead, he cared more about those refugees who had suffered hunger and coldness. After Nail told his concern, Eagle Face looked at him thoughtfully and answered after a moment, "It's impossible for the camp to keep these outsiders. Give them some tents and food, and allow them to encamp in places where the heavy machine guns cover." In this utterly unsheltered field? Nail said worriedly, "If the weather becomes worse and there's heavy rain or storm at night, they probably won't survive the night. As the head of the garrison in the northern region, I must give top priority to the safety of the First Army." Eagle Face was unmoved and said, "I will inform Duke Kant to accommodate them. Before the arrival of the helpers in Deep Valley Town, these people have to pray to have a good luck." Chapter 825, Dusk Tolls. Tucker Thor climbed up the fortified city wall of the new holy city and slowly walked to the blotchy parapet. It was probably the most peaceful months of demons after the establishment of the stronghold. As a tactic to defend against demonic beasts, the city wall was cleaned up regularly, covered with no ice or snow, but stood out in the bleak, vast whiteness like an ash-gray giant all the year round, no matter how big the snow was. At present, however, Tucker could easily leave his footprints on the snow-covered wall. All traces of the battle had been wiped out by thick snows, including lumps and bumps on the flagstone pavement, and blood that seeped through the crevices between the slabs, as if nothing had ever happened. It would be an incredible scene in the past. Nonetheless, the recent drastic changes had completely overshadowed such aberrancy. Tucker had thought the holy city of Hermes would be razed to the ground by swarms of demonic beasts. In fact, all the believers had determined to remain in the cathedral to the last, but they had not anticipated that few enemies had actually appeared. Those who did come to attack had not even made an attempt to crawl up the city wall. While everybody was still absorbed in profound astonishment and celebration delight, the subsequent event, however, came as a heavy blow in such a cruel fashion that they were once again reminded of the volatility of the deities. As the church had suffered a great loss during the war against Grey Castle, the top priority in winter had become the election of 3 new archbishops and other senior executives. In order to maintain the order in the holy city and restore believers' faith in God, many young believers had been promoted to key positions. Tucker had also been elevated from Chief Justice to one of the acting bishops. Just when the situation was about to turn for the better, the abrupt collapse of the cathedral at a windless night, which had killed a number of senior executives, destroyed all hopes of the war survivors. At that time, Tucker had happened to be patrolling the campsite and therefore had narrowly escaped death. Nobody knew how it had happened, although rumors about a great fire in the core underground area beneath the church remained afloat. It was also rumored that the area had once been attacked by demonic beasts. Yet without the permission of the Pope, they could not access the secret trap on their own, notwithstanding the mysterious disappearance of the acting Pope Reverend Tafon. The sag of the Hermes Cathedral could be considered as a more miserable defeat than the war. The loss of the war could be attributed to the poor and confusing communications between commanders and soldiers, or to the treachery of their enemies, but the collapse of the Tower of Babel, which represented the spirit of the church, meant that they had been abandoned by God. The incident had almost become their last straw in consideration of their already precarious situation. Although the church had blocked the scene immediately, the news still spread out. Residents in the holy city started to flee Hermes, beginning from masons and tradesmen living in the outer part of the city, who did not put much faith in the church in the first place. Then, like a contagious plague, terror slowly spread to the outer city and the inner city, except this time there was no divine cure for the disease. Tucker had once organized a reverent prayer ceremony on the city wall with all the members of the Judgment Army and priests, hoping that the deities would once again divert their attention to this last human stronghold and protect living beings behind it from the evil power in hell, but the deities had not responded to their prayer. Tucker Thor remembered that Pope Maine had once taught him that power was the only means to defy evil. However, he could not think of anything other than praying to God to re-establish the church's integrity. "Your Eminence. Here you are." A woman's voice came from behind. "The army responsible for pursuing fugitives has returned, but some of the units fled, right?" Tucker turned around and said in a soft voice. As he had expected, the reporter was Farina, one of the commanders that survived of the Judgment Army who took over his previous position. The resemblance on Farina's face reminded Tucker another woman, Alicia, a warrior from the advanced battalion who had sacrificed herself for the church. As one of the few female Judgment warriors, they both had a tough character. Alicia had fought to her death when over half of her comrades had been killed as demonic beasts had approached the wall of the cathedral. Farina, on the other hand, assumed the critical role of the commander of the Judgment Army when their very survival was threatened to keep the situation from getting out of hand. Farina stomped indignantly. "Yes. Those new recruits who just joined recently cannot be of any use. More than 20 people went to catch fugitives, but only 1 or 2 returned. I know they haven't received much training, but it's very unlikely that they would be killed by refugees. If I ever find them, I'll definitely let them know the consequence of betrayal." Tucker sighed. "It's inevitable. How many people are left in the Judgment Army?" 564. "They're all guarding the inner city gate of the Holy City, so they should be able to stop residents in the inner city from leaving." Tucker knew that these soldiers plus around 100 God's punishment warriors down the ruin of the church were the only forces left. He concluded that human beings were doomed, for it was impossible for these 100-odd soldiers to stop demons. Tucker had learned this powerful enemy from Pope Maine. What the church had been striving to achieve was to help human beings survive the battle of doomsday and ensure the continuation of the human race. That was the reason they developed powerful warriors like the God's Punishment Army. But that was not sufficient. The church also had to unify the 4 kingdoms before the great battle and combine all human power in order to gain the eventual victory. What was the point of keeping the hold of this plateau stronghold when there is no hope? There was little he could do, but for those 500-odd people, they could be relieved of the burden of protecting the whole human race. Tucker finally broke the silence. "Go to the east. The kingdom of Neverwinter or the kingdom of Wolfheart, whichever it is, pick somewhere close to the coast. We can build a new holy city there." He believed in that case, even if demons invaded the 4 kingdoms, they could still, if lucky, flee by boat from the harbor to some distant islands and spend the rest of their life there before human beings were wiped out. Farina was stunned. "Leave Hermes? But Your Eminence, if we leave, who will defend against demonic beasts? We can blame Grey Castle if demonic beasts invade the inner continent from the breach. Our current top priority is to reserve our strength. We can always build a new cathedral, but we can't let our believers suffer. When the 4 kingdoms are permeated with demonic beasts, people will naturally remember our power again. Demonic beasts don't really matter, as they aren't our true enemies. The greatest threat is from the depth of hell, but there's nothing you guys can do about it. What I can do at this last moment is to keep you as far away from the battlefield as possible." "You've done enough to protect human beings," Tucker said within himself. Farina's slender brows furrowed. "Those pious believers who resolve to fall with the holy city may not agree to abandon Hermes." Tucker replied after a moment of silence, "The holy city lies where you stay, child. Explain to them, and they'll understand. This is also the order of the acting pope, which is to preserve ourselves and the spirit of the church. Do you understand? Let those fugitives leave as they please and spread the news of the fall of the holy city. By that time, the king of Grey Castle will probably be anxious to take them in," thought Tucker. "I understand, Your Eminence." "No, Your Holiness," Farina bit her lip. At length, she curled up her hands into a fist, placed it over her chest and bowed. Just then, the somber sky was overspread by a haze of dusk. Tucker turned around and saw the orangey-red rays of the setting sun slowly streak through clouds and that the fresh white snowfield was basking in slanting beams of sunshine. Does this mean the months of demons has ended? Farina's face lighted up. Yes. The snow will melt in no time. Go and tell the news. If they start to prepare now, we'll be able to take off in 2 or 3 weeks. Okay. Please excuse me. She nodded and ran to the inner city. At that moment, the bell in the holy city tolled, announcing the arrival of evening. The bell tolled 9 times to tell believers that it was time to close their eyes and pray to God. Yet Tucker Thord did not pray. Because God was not listening to them anymore. He took off the crown on his head and placed it on the balcony. Then he ascended the city wall and gazed at the last splendor of the setting sun. He had one more thing to do to persuade people to completely abandon Hermes. But Tucker did not mind it because by doing so, he would be able to reunite with his old battle companions who had once fought with him. It was not only a twilight for the church, but also for the whole human race. Tucker shut his eyes and stooped over. Farina heard a gentle thud behind her as if something had slipped down the wall and into the valley. When she turned around, however, there was nobody on the city wall. The end of the volume, The Bell of Twilight. Chapter 826, Conference of Agriculture Mobilization Movement. The months of demons this year lasted for nearly 5 months. By the time murky clouds that overhung the western region were dispersed by warm sunbeams, it was late spring. Roland faced a pressing issue. It was spring plowing. Although the war against the southernmost region during the months of demons, when the other powers were all sort of in a state of dormancy, had won him a lot of time to prelude the unification operation, it was also undeniable that he had consumed tons of food in winter. Due to the lack of food input and the rapid increase in the population, the food in the granary in the border area was, for the first time, exhausted. Roland was secretly happy that he had entrusted the seeds of golden ones developed by Leaf to Petrov and had ordered him to promote engineered food to the public right after the seizure of Longsong stronghold, otherwise, they would not have peacefully made their way through the months of demons this year. The concrete boats traveling between the border and the Longsong area was the lifeline of the First Army, for they transported pancakes made from coarse-grained wheat flour to soldiers fighting at the front. As a result of the urgency of the matter, Roland convened a spring plowing conference right after the celebration of Victory Day. On that day, not only the Ministry of Agriculture but the whole City Hall, including secondary officials in the Longsong area, the district governor, Petrov, and the governor of Fallen Dragon Ridge, Spear, were all summoned to the Neverwinter castle. It should be noted that Spear Passy was directly transferred by Maggie. Ghastly pale and frightened, she complained about her rough flight when she landed and bowed to Roland. Calvin Cant, the lord of the northern region, was absent, but he sent his daughter Edith and his second son Cole to attend the conference on behalf of him. Roland was not sure if it was an illusion, but he noticed, somehow, that the pearl of the northern region had become more radiant since her return from the Great Snow Mountain. Compared with her resplendency, Cole seemed increasingly frail and insignificant. Roland also wondered whether his attire was a little too androgynous. Anyhow, the attendees of the conference came from all parts of Grey Castle, except the eastern region, whose lord had yet to pledge fealty to Roland, and the central region, where Roland had yet to establish a well-functioning city hall. Without these two regions, the conference could be considered as the first national congress. Roland surveyed the hall in satisfaction and then tapped the desk. Everybody instantly became silent. All the eyes rested upon the king. You must be wondering why I wrote the word operation on the banner. Roland pointed to the red banner on the wall behind him. Because this is essentially a war. It determines whether we can successfully implement our strategic plan this year and whether we're doing the right thing for people in Neverwinter. I promised to refugees when I took them and that as long as they worked hard, they would never starve. In the past 3 years, I fulfilled my promise. My domain expanded from a small, underdeveloped border town to more than half of the territory of Grey Castle. I see no reason that we can't make it happen this year. Our kingdom would only be stable when our subjects aren't worried about food. Therefore, I need every one of you to take spring plowing seriously. All of you have to reach your agricultural production target this year in accordance with the plowing regulations and guidelines drafted by the Ministry of Agriculture. Roland paused for a second and then continued, also, starting from this year, there will be an assessment specifically targeting the agricultural progress in your jurisdiction, which will include evaluations on how much virgin land you've cultivated, the number of farmers in your domain, as well as the agricultural production. These factors will be incorporated into the criteria for a competent governor. Perceiving the confusion among all the attendees, Roland smiled faintly. It's okay you don't know about these evaluation items, because Sirius, the Minister of Agriculture, will later spend one day explaining to you in detail. In conclusion, if you fail to meet my criteria, it tells me that you aren't competent to rule the region and are no longer suitable for the governor position. Nobody uttered a word, but Roland could clearly sense the tension among them from their expressions. This was exactly the effect Roland wanted to achieve. The abortion of the feudal system not only meant the cancellation of feudal rights but also meant the abolishment of the hereditary system. Roland allowed those officials to receive benefits from the government, but he would not tolerate any delays of his development plan. The agriculture assessment was simply a start. Roland uncovered the curtain behind him, revealing the big red number underneath, and said, "I'll set an easy target for you for the first year in terms of other criteria. But in terms of agricultural production, I want you to reach this number." Everyone gasped. 2,500,000 kilograms? Roland was not surprised at their reaction. The average production in this era was 500,000 kilograms for a mid-sized city and 750,000 for a big one like the old King's City. The first time they had grown golden ones in Border Town, the food production was a little over 350,000 kilograms, which had been considered as an unprecedented big harvest at that time. Of course, the actual food production was largely influenced by farmland areas and the number of farmers. Unlike Border Town, which relied heavily on high-return crops, big cities totally depended on the surrounding villages and small towns, as well as the work of thousands of farmers to obtain such a big quantity of food. Because of this, he decided to include farmland areas and the number of farmers in the evaluation. The fewer farmers were, the more workers would be in the factory. Roland signaled everybody to be quiet. In fact, when you see the testing field for golden twos, you'll understand this target isn't that unrealistic. After numerous repeated tests by Leaf, golden twos can now yield food more than 2 times gold ones per unit. The wheat straw in the field is overloaded by ears of wheat. Petrov exclaimed in surprise. "Your Majesty, is it true that golden twos can yield 2 times more?" Among all the officials outside Neverwinter, Petrov was the only one who was impressed by the amazing production rate of golden ones. During the war in the Months of Demons, the Longsong area had provided the First Army with over half of the total supplies, thanks to the cultivation of golden ones that had generated a huge amount of excess. In comparison, the normal wheat they had previously grown could not even suffice to feed people in one city. That's right, but golden twos aren't perfect either. Roland looked at Leaf standing next to him and announced, "Now I'll hand over to Miss Leaf from the Witch Union, who will talk about the features of golden twos in detail." After a slight nod, Leaf walked up to him with a bag of grown wheat in her hand and showed it to everybody. She said, "Golden twos are different from any wheat you've grown before. It can only be grown once. So, you have to come to Neverwinter annually to get new seeds. I'd strengthen the root of the plant so that it can absorb nutrition from the soil deep down the earth. That's also the reason it requires a lot of fertilizer, otherwise, we'll have to adopt a fallow system by marking out 3 farmlands and using them in a rotation. Also," Roland stroked his chin in satisfaction while watching Leaf become more confident and comfortable to speak in public. "Golden twos could be viewed as a new type of wheat that produced its own jinkala. Its roots could extend 4 to 5 meters underground and absorb nutrients more efficiently. Apart from being unable to reproduce, it surpassed golden ones in every aspect. This sole defect of golden twos was actually a merit for Neverwinter. As the plant could not reproduce, the other cities would have to rely on the new king's city's supply once they started to grow golden twos. At the same time, other low-yield wheat would be obsolete and pushed out of the market. In a sense, golden twos enabled Roland to create a food monopoly, and the government would definitely benefit a lot from the control of the food resources. Roland believed no farmers would want to grow normal wheat again after they tried out golden twos. The promotion of the newly developed seeds throughout the whole nation would largely alleviate the problem of food deficiency. With more food, he could feed more people. Because now, he no longer contented himself with ruling just Grey Castle.